For over 200 years, Britain made things: ships, engines, chemicals, and cloth. Millions of people earned their living behind factory gates. They built their identities there too. But something happened. Over the space of a few decades, the machines stopped and gates closed. The buildings were left to stand empty, and then the fences went up. I have gone through planning records, local archives, and the testimonies of people who worked in these places to bring you 15 abandoned factories you are not permitted to enter, and the reasons they were left behind. Hey, before we get into it, if you love looking back at the good old days of Britain, go check out my mate Albert over at Albert's Old Britain. Trust me, he is bringing back memories you did not even know you had. We begin in East London. On the south side of the Royal Victoria Dock, between the Thames Barrier and the ExCeL Exhibition Centre, stands Millennium Mills. It is a vast Art Deco flour mill in Silvertown, in the London borough of Newham. 10 stories of reinforced concrete face the water. The building was originally completed in 1905 by Vernon and Sons, who named it after their Millennium brand of flour. It became part of the largest concentration of flour milling in the Port of London. Grain arrived by ship from overseas and was processed directly at the dockside. In January 1917, the building was severely damaged when a munitions factory operated by Brunner Mond exploded roughly 100 yards to the east. The Silvertown explosion killed 73 people and damaged over 70,000 buildings across the area. Millennium Mills was rebuilt. It survived the Blitz. It was rebuilt again in the 1950s. It kept working until the Royal Docks closed in 1981. Since then, it has stood empty. Over 40 years of dereliction. A forest of milling equipment, chutes, ducts, and pipes remains inside. Asbestos was identified throughout the structure. The building became a magnet for urban explorers, despite high security and the danger of 10-story drops through collapsing floors. Multiple redevelopment schemes have come and gone. A £1.5 billion plan collapsed after the 2008 financial crash. In 2015, Newham Council approved a £3.5 billion scheme. Updated plans for over 7,000 homes were approved in late 2025. The mill itself is set to become flexible workspace. But as of today, the building remains fenced off, a structure that survived an explosion, 2 world wars, and 4 decades of neglect. Still standing, still waiting. Heading southwest into Hampshire, we find something entirely different. Between the towns of Farnborough and Fleet, hidden in woodland, once stood the National Gas Turbine establishment at Paisley. It was one of the most important engineering facilities Britain ever built. From the 1950s through the 1970s, it was the largest gas turbine testing site in Europe and possibly the world. The engines that powered Concorde were tested here. The Olympus jet engines were run up in simulated supersonic conditions inside enormous test cells. Every gas turbine installed in Royal Navy ships was inspected at Paisley. During the Cold War, captured Soviet engines were quietly examined on site. At its peak, around 1,600 staff worked here. The facility was the size of a small town. It closed in 2000 when the government reorganised defence research. The site lay abandoned and became what the urban exploration community called the Holy Grail of industrial sites in the UK. Motion sensors and security patrols kept most people out. But photographs that did emerge showed cathedral-sized test chambers and control rooms frozen in time. Dials still set to their last readings. Clipboards still hanging on walls. Tea mugs left on desks, as if the staff had simply walked out one afternoon and never come back. Then, in 2013, the bulldozers arrived. The entire complex was demolished to make way for a supermarket distribution depot. The place that tested the engines of Concorde was flattened so that groceries could be stored. Let that sit with you for a moment. Now we come to a building that almost everyone in Britain would recognise. Battersea. power station is on the south bank of the Thames. It was designed by Leonard Pearce and Giles Gilbert Scott, the man who also gave us the red telephone box. Its 4 white chimneys became one of the most famous silhouettes in London. At its peak, the station produced a fifth of London's electricity, supplying power to the Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace. It was decommissioned in 1983. For the next 4 decades, it sat empty. The roof was removed in the late 1980s, accelerating the decay. Rain poured into the turbine halls. Pigeons colonized the boiler rooms. Scheme after scheme was proposed: a theme park, an eco-dome, a biomass power station. Every single one collapsed. Londoners watched the building crumble in slow motion for 40 years. In 2022, it finally reopened after a massive redevelopment backed by Malaysian investors. It now contains Apple offices and luxury flats. The building was saved, but whether what replaced it has anything to do with the community that built it is another question. The workers who shoveled coal into those furnaces could not afford a studio flat in the building they once powered. On the A27 in West Sussex, visible from the road, the remains of Shoreham cement works loom over the landscape. This was one of the largest industrial sites in southern England. Vast concrete structures, towering kilns. The works produced cement for major construction projects across the southeast from the early 20th century onward. It closed in the early 1990s. Since then, it has been fenced off. Asbestos contamination was identified across the site. Structural surveys deemed multiple buildings unsafe. Private security patrols the perimeter. Redevelopment proposals have come and gone for over 30 years. Local residents have campaigned endlessly about what should happen to the land. Nobody can agree. And so it sits there. Some factories are abandoned because an industry moved on. Some are abandoned because nobody can agree on what comes next. Shoreham has been waiting for an answer for more than 3 decades. Those first 4 are the kind of places that attract photographers and history enthusiasts. They are visually extraordinary. But the factories we come to now carry a different kind of weight. These are places tied to national events that many of you will remember. Places where the closure was not quiet decline, but sudden, political, and devastating. 5 miles east of Sheffield and 3.5 miles southwest of Rotherham stood Orgreave Coking Works. The plant produced purified carbon fuel for steel production. But the name Orgreave is not remembered for what was made there. It is remembered for what happened at its gates. On the 18th of June, 1984, during the miners' strike, a mass confrontation erupted between police and striking miners outside the coking works. Officers on horseback charged into crowds. Men were beaten and arrested. It later emerged that many police officers had large parts of their statements dictated to them, and that many had lied. One statement with a forged signature simply disappeared from court over lunchtime. Charges against the arrested miners were dropped, but no officer was ever held to account. The coking ovens closed in 1990. The colliery had already shut in 1981. The entire site was demolished. Today, a housing estate covers the ground where the battle took place. The Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign continues to demand a public inquiry. The factory is gone. The site no longer exists. You cannot enter it because there is nothing left to enter. What remains is a demand for truth that has been waiting over 40 years. Further north on the coast of Teesside, another story of industrial betrayal. The blast furnace at Redcar was first lit in 1979. It stood over 60 meters tall. When the Thai-owned SSY closed the works in October 2015, it was the last blast furnace on Teesside. 2,200 workers lost their jobs. Many were told on the day. No phased closure, no transition plan. At its height, the Teesside steel industry had employed over 30,000 people. By that October morning in 2015, it was over. 2 centuries of steelmaking on Teesside finished with a phone call telling people not to come in. The site was designated as Teesworks, now described as the UK's largest industrial zone. But the project has been surrounded by controversy. In 2021, 90% of the company overseeing the redevelopment was transferred to two local property developers without a public tender process. Remediated land was sold for £1 per acre. Questions about governance and the use of public funds have led to government reviews and accusations that rang through Parliament. The blast furnace itself was demolished. In June 2023, Lord Hazeltine pressed the button that brought down the final steelworks structures. Everything was gone in 15 seconds. Locals who had spent their working lives inside those walls heard the explosion from their homes. Across to Scotland. Motherwell was once known as Steelopolis. Its skyline was dominated by the gas holder and three cooling towers of the Ravenscraig Steelworks. Construction started in 1954. By the late 1950s, the plant had coke ovens, a blast furnace, and an open hearth melting shop. The hot strip mill was the largest in Western Europe. At its peak, Ravenscraig employed around 7,000 workers directly and supported thousands more. It closed in 1992. The closure came despite government assurances that the plant would remain open. It was widely seen as a betrayal of the Scottish industrial workforce. Demolition started in 1996. The landmark blue gasometer came down. The site became the largest brownfield land in Europe, over 1,200 acres of contaminated ground between Motherwell and Wishaw. 30 years on, remediation is still underway. In late 2025, North Lanarkshire Council approved extraction and cleanup works covering 200 acres. Over 2.7 million cubic meters of material need to be moved. A joint venture involving Barratt, Tata Steel and Scottish Enterprise has invested £250 million so far. A new town is slowly emerging. But slowly is the word. Ravenscraig was not just a factory. It was a promise from the state that Scotland's industrial heartland would be protected. The promise was broken. The land is still being cleaned up. In Northamptonshire, the town of Corby was built around steel. Its population tripled in the mid-20th century as workers arrived, many from Scotland, following the industry south. At its height, the Corby Works employed approximately 11,000 people in a town of fewer than 50,000. When the main steelmaking operations closed in 1980, the town nearly died with them. Unemployment hit over 30%. The identity of Corby was inseparable from its steelworks. When the factory shut, the town had nothing else. The site has since been largely redeveloped. Retail parks and housing estates cover parts of the former works, but the environmental legacy endured. In 2009, a landmark legal case resulted in children born near the former works being awarded damages after investigations revealed toxic waste had not been properly contained. Corby is a town that was invented by a steelworks and then abandoned by it. The children who grew up on that contaminated land did not choose to live there. Their parents had followed the work. When the work left, the poison stayed. The steel and coal closures happened within living memory. Many of you worked in those industries or knew people who did. But the factories we turn to now represent something older. Industries that once defined entire regions of Britain. Thread, textiles, engineering. The kind of work that gave towns their names and their reason to exist. In Clydebank, on the outskirts of Glasgow, the Singer Manufacturing Company opened its factory in 1884. At its peak, it was the largest sewing machine factory in the world, employing around 16,000 workers. The factory complex was enormous. Its clock tower became the defining landmark of Clydebank. The works had its own railway station. Entire streets were built to house the workers. Pubs and shops and churches grew up around the gates. The factory did not sit inside the town. The town grew around the factory. During the Clydebank Blitz of March 1941, the factory was targeted by the Luftwaffe. Only 7 houses in the entire town were left undamaged. But Clydebank rebuilt, and Singer kept producing. Global competition and changing manufacturing patterns led to steady decline through the post-war decades. The factory closed in 1998. The clock tower was eventually demolished. A retail and business park now covers the site. Clydebank was the Singer factory. The factory was Clydebank. When the clock tower came down, something more than bricks was lost. A few miles to the south, Paisley was once the global capital of thread manufacturing. The Coates and Clark companies were headquartered here. At their peak, Paisley's mills were exporting thread to virtually every country on Earth. The Anchor Mills complex covered a vast area in the center of town. Over 10,000 people worked in the thread industry locally. Production wound down through the late 20th century as manufacturing moved overseas. Several mill buildings remain standing, but sit in various states of dereliction and restricted access. Listed building status has prevented demolition and has also made redevelopment complex and expensive. Various regeneration proposals have been put forward over the years. Progress has been slow, but the town's thread once held together the garments of half the world. The mills that made it are empty. The thread is gone. The buildings wait. On Teesside, for the second time in this list, we find the remains of Imperial chemical industries. In the 1970s, every child in a local school had a father who worked either at ICY or the Steelworks. 75,000 employees between them. The ICI site at Wilton was officially opened in 1949 to meet the enormous post-war demand for plastics and fibres and man-made materials. This was where Teesside made the polyester that clothed the world, a British invention. At Billingham, the Haber-Bosch fertilizer process helped feed the planet. The works were so large, they had their own internal road network, their own fire brigade, their own medical centre. You could spend an entire career at ICI and never set foot outside the perimeter fence. In the 1990s, much of the business was sold off. In 2008, ICI was taken over by Akzo Nobel, and after 80 years, the chemical industry on Teesside came largely to an end. Large portions of the former complex at both Wilton and Billingham are now derelict or demolished. Sections remain restricted due to contamination. I was not just a company on Teesside, it was the company. It provided work, identity, sports clubs, social life, everything. When ICI fragmented, Teesside lost something that no regeneration scheme can replace, a shared purpose. In Somerset, beside the River Tone near Wellington, sits a factory that most people will never have heard of. Tone Mills is described as a near-complete example of a 19th century cloth dyeing and finishing works. It was the last woolen mill in the West Country. The buildings date from the Victorian era, and they represent an almost intact record of the processes that once made this region a centre of the wool trade. The site has been closed for years. Floors have partially collapsed. Vegetation has begun growing through the interior. Listed building protections apply, but maintenance has been minimal. The site is fenced off and monitored. Not every abandoned factory is a steelworks or a power station. Some are small and local and represent trades that simply faded away. Tone Mills is the last of its kind. When it falls, there will be nothing left of the West Country wool trade but photographs. The factories we have looked at so far were built to make things. Thread and steel and flour and jet engines. But some factories exist to generate the power that kept everything else running. And when a power station closes, it does not leave behind an empty building. It leaves behind something far more complicated. On the western shore of Southampton Water in Hampshire, Fawley Power Station was one of the largest oil-fired power stations in Europe. Located adjacent to the Fawley oil refinery, the station operated from 1971 to 2013. At peak output, it could generate 2,000 megawatts of electricity, enough to power a city. Following closure, the site has been subject to demolition and remediation. The cooling towers and chimney stack were brought down in controlled explosions. But the land beneath contains decades of contamination from fossil fuel operations. Environmental assessments are extensive and ongoing. Housing has been proposed for the site, but the question of what lies in the soil has not been fully answered. Access is strictly prohibited. The site is patrolled and fenced. When a power station this size closes, you cannot simply knock it down and build houses. The land remembers what was done to it. The question is how long it takes before anyone can safely stand on it again. In the Severn Gorge in Shropshire, within sight of the Ironbridge itself, stood Ironbridge Power Station. The original station opened in 1932. The larger B station began generating in 1969. 4 cooling towers, each 120 meters tall, dominated the valley. The towers had been deliberately built using concrete tinted with red pigment to blend with the local soil. It cost £11,000 in the 1960s to colour them. The station stopped generating in 2015. On the 6th of December 2019, the 4 cooling towers were brought down by a controlled explosion. 45,000 tons of reinforced concrete hit the ground in under 10 seconds. Thousands of local residents watched. The chimney stack, the tallest structure in Shropshire and taller than Blackpool Tower, was brought down later. The site has been approved for up to 1,000 homes. Houses are now going up on the ground where the towers once stood. The development is called Benthall Grange. There is something profoundly strange about a power station that stood in the shadow of the very bridge that started the industrial age. The bridge is a monument preserved forever. The power station is rubble being turned into a housing estate. Both tell the same story from different ends. And finally, we come to North Wales. On the shores of Llyn Trawsfynydd, in what is now Eryri National Park, stands a nuclear power station. Trawsfynydd was Britain's only inland nuclear power station. It was designed by Basil Spence, the architect who also designed Coventry Cathedral. Construction began in 1959. Both Magnox reactors were operational by 1965. It was closed in 1991. Defueling was completed by 1997, and the spent fuel was transported to Sellafield for reprocessing. But the twin reactor buildings still stand. They are over 60 years old now. The structures have experienced significant wear from decades of exposure to the elements. In late 2025, a £70 million contract was awarded to begin reducing the height of both reactor buildings from 54 metres to 25 metres. This alone will take 4 years and will involve the recovery of 15,000 cubic metres of concrete and brickwork. Contaminated material is stored in a specially designed building on site. Final clearance of the site is not scheduled to begin until 2071. The local community, a Welsh-speaking rural area, has lived alongside this facility for over 60 years. They will continue to do so for decades more. A nuclear power station built in the heart of a national park in the 1960s, still standing, still restricted, still not safe to enter, and not expected to be fully decommissioned until your grandchildren's grandchildren are old enough to ask what it was for. And don't forget, if you want a proper trip down memory lane, my mate Albert at Albert's Old Britain has got you covered. Go show him some love.